What is this?
The Great War. Why were we even involved? Why?
Well, one reason Americans joined World War I was because Germany's unrestricted submarine warfare. A German submarine did a surprise torpedo attack on a British boat called the RMS Lusitania, killing over 1,000 people. Over 100 of those passengers were American.
A German submarine also sank a French boat called the Sussex, killing some more Americans.
After the attack, Wilson made an ultimatum threatening to severe diplomatic relations with Germany's imperial government if they didn't stop.
The Sussex Pledge was an agreement in May 1916 by the German government to stop the indiscriminate sinking of non-military ships. Germany announced that they would continue unlimited submarine warfare anyway.
And they thought it was acceptable because the U.S. couldn't be considered a neutral party anymore after supplying munitions and financial support to the Allies, so Wilson announced a break in diplomatic relationships with Germany.
A German diplomat, Arthur Zimmermann, offered support to the Mexican government if they attacked the U.S. through a telegram. The Mexicans declined anyway.
Then on January 19, 1917, British naval intelligence intercepted and encrypted the telegram using the note to help sway the U.S. into joining the war. So on April 6, 1917, the U.S. formally entered World War I with the Allies, Britain and France, against the Central Powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria.
The Germans had these submarines called U-boats, the ones that they attacked innocent people with.
There were also tanks and poisonous gas.
Most of all, there was a trench warfare. The new artillery and machine guns were getting too powerful and accurate, so both sides resolved to trenches.
The in-between was no man's land, a very dangerous place to cross through.
The most intense part of it all was that it was a total war. Both civilians and soldiers became targets.
And propaganda. This was used during mobilization to encourage support of the war efforts while the nations prepared their military forces and civilian infrastructure for war.
American soldiers experienced hardships that were both mentally and physically exhausting.
American soldiers didn't receive very good training, and they were often starved because of the supply shortages in weapons and food. They were constantly exposed to disease, and they became psychologically traumatized.
Many were drafted through conscription, which was the use of the law to force people to join the army.
In the trenches. Don't get me started. Water up to your knees, giving you trench foot, rats the size of cats, lice, and tons of human waste that you practically lived in.
There was never a single moment of peace.
German U-boats lurked everywhere, sinking any ship they found.
That threat led to the convoy system being established, a naval strategy made by the British Royal Navy.
While we were fighting overseas, life back home wasn't the same.
Factories were booming, and suddenly there were tons of jobs for people.
While available jobs and wages increased, so did inflation.
These changes caused the Great Migration, where many African Americans migrated to the north in huge numbers looking for better opportunities and work.
Even women started joining the workforce.
Vigilante groups like the American Protective League were everywhere. They spied and reported on anyone they thought wasn't patriotic enough.
Nationalism infested and ran wild across America, even so much that suspicion towards immigrants grew, and some people even started turning violent against anyone they saw as disloyal.
The war effort didn't stop on the battlefield. The government and business had to join forces to supply the army with everything they needed.
Factories that once made normal goods were converted to produce guns, ammo, and all sorts of war materials and resources.
And while most companies cooperated, there was some serious pressure from the government to ensure that none of them were slacking off in their work.
They even enlisted in the $1-a-year men, who were primarily business leaders and executives that bridged the gap between the government and industry.
The government even went so far as to offer cost-plus contracts that guaranteed a profit for companies, which encouraged these companies to increase their production rates. So the war had many important aspects. But what about when it was over?
The Treaty of Versailles marked the end of World War I between Germany and Allied powers, and required Germany to agree to conditions like the War Guilt Clause, which they had to take sole responsibility for World War I.
The League of Nations was established to prevent future wars, and new borders were drawn.
Oh yeah, don't forget the League of Nations was also a part of Wilson's 14 Points, which was a blueprint for building peace after the war, which consisted of open diplomacy, free trade, equal trade conditions, disarmament, and territorial charges.
Not to mention returning Alsace or Lorraine, which was a French territory annexed by Germany but was reclaimed by France after the war as a part of the Treaty of Versailles.
Yes, the war caused many casualties and economic crisis was everywhere, especially Europe. The end of the war signaled a period of rebuilding.
It also brought about many new technological innovations and the rise of political movements such as communism, civil rights, women's suffrage, and fascism.
Certainly there's more to America's involvement in the war. I mean, it was a big part of it.
America's involvement was actually a departure from American tradition because America usually stayed isolated.
The establishment of alliances were already present when the war started, as Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy already had the Triple Alliance, and in response, France and Britain and Russia had the Triple Entente.
Not to mention, America started to push for women's suffrage and increased civil rights activism.
Yeah, true. Compared to America's role today, there are many similarities and differences about how America carried itself.
Similarities being that it was still heavily reliant on innovations in military technologies, and it was a major power during those times.
And differences being that America is now more involved in international affairs and isn't as isolated. Global power and leader with alliances and military power worldwide instead of just concentrated in the U.S.
So we know what happened during the war, but what happened after in America?
Well, it's been made clear that America was pretty involved in the war, so I'd assume they'd be impacted because of their participation.
And you'd be correct. America's involvement in the war gave them the potential to become a global military power.
That's right. They were able to rapidly build a modern military and supply the Allies and itself, showing how strong they were industrially and financially.
Women's contributions to the war effort provided momentum for the women's suffrage movement, and they were granted the right to vote in 1920 through the 19th Amendment.
I thought there were also debates over a thing called something.
Isolationism?
I'm pretty sure it was over whether America should intervene with European conflicts.
There were also groups of people called internationalists, like President Woodrow Wilson, who supported the creation of the League of Nations, which would serve as the most prominent point of Wilson's 14 points.
Wartime job opportunities and a desire for social and political freedoms resulted in many African Americans moving to urban areas in the North and West.
However, with the arrival of African Americans, racial tensions began to increase among Americans.
Well, that's not good.
Definitely.
Along with that, economic crisis began to arise with unemployment rates reaching 20% and labor strikes beginning to form.
I mean, the Ottoman, German, Russian, and Austria-Hungarian empires all collapsed.
The whole reason the war began was because Austria-Hungary wanted to avenge Archduke Franz Ferdinand's death. The empire's decision to fight back exposed all of its weaknesses, and it was destroyed.
Didn't Germany suffer a huge economic devastation?
Yep, cities also faced mass destruction.
But we benefited from it too. In fact, this whole war drove America to become a huge global power.
That's true, but this war also led to ideologies that contributed to World War II, and it sparked Soviet communism and Hitler's rise.
It also led to decolonization amongst countries across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East.
My goodness.
Horrible. Truly.
I would never do this again.
You can say that again.